The blood on her dress had long since dried to a rust-brown stain, but Margot Neville still felt the weight of it against her ribs like a second skin, as she stumbled into Ukiah, California, on a hot July afternoon in 1878. She had walked the last 12 miles after her horse threw a shoe, and every step reminded her of exactly how broken she was, how ruined, how utterly beyond salvage. The town stretched before her in dusty wooden buildings and false-fronted stores, and she wondered if there was enough distance between here and San Francisco to ever make her feel clean again. She had $3 in her pocket, a carpet bag with 2 changes of clothes, and enough shame to fill the Pacific Ocean. The bruises on her arms had faded to yellow, but the ones inside her felt fresh as the moment they were made. Her husband, if she could even call him that anymore, was 6 feet under in a cemetery outside Sacramento. The law had called it self-defense when she pulled the trigger. The townspeople had called her other things entirely. Margot pushed through the doors of the Painted Lady Saloon, not because she wanted a drink, but because she needed work and saloons were always hiring. The place smelled of tobacco and whiskey and sweat, familiar scents that made her stomach turn even as she straightened her spine and walked to the bar. A woman with painted lips and tired eyes looked her up and down. "We do not need any more girls," the woman said, her voice flat. "I am not looking for that kind of work," Margot replied, keeping her voice steady. "I can cook, clean, keep books. I can do anything honest." The woman laughed short and sharp. "Honest? In a saloon?" "More honest than some things," Margot said quietly. Something in her tone must have landed right because the woman's expression softened fractionally. "Clara Vance, I run this place. You look like you have been through hell and back." "Just hell," Margot said. "I did not make it back." Clara studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the stairs. "Room at the top. 3rd door on the right. It is small, but it is yours if you want it. You can work the kitchen, help with the cleaning. I will pay you $15 a month plus room and board." It was less than she could make other ways, but Margot nodded gratefully. She climbed those stairs on trembling legs, found the room exactly as described, tiny, sparse, clean, and closed the door behind her before she finally let herself cry. 2 weeks passed before she saw him for the first time. Xavier Emerson rode into town on a gray gelding that had seen better days, leading a string of 3 wild mustangs he had broken somewhere out in the high desert. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair that might have been brown or black. It was hard to tell under the dust. His eyes were the color of whiskey held up to lamplight, and they carried the kind of weariness that comes from seeing too much and surviving it anyway. He sold the mustangs to the livery stable, took his pay, and walked straight to the Painted Lady. Margot was wiping down tables when he came in, and she barely glanced up. Men came and went all day long, and she had learned to make herself invisible, unremarkable, forgettable. It was safer that way. Xavier sat at the bar and ordered whiskey. Clara poured it herself, which meant something, though Margot did not know what yet. She went back to her work, moving quietly through the room, gathering empty glasses and dirty plates. "That one's new," she heard Xavier say to Clara. "Arrived a couple weeks back, keeps to herself, works hard." "That is all you need to know." "Was not asking for anything else," Xavier replied mildly. Margot felt his eyes on her briefly, then they moved away and she breathed easier. She finished her work and retreated to the kitchen, where she felt safest. The cook, a gruff Mexican man named Tomás, had taken a grandfatherly interest in her, making sure she ate enough and did not work herself into exhaustion. "That man at the bar," Tomás said, stirring a pot of stew. "Xavier Emerson. He is a good man, lonely but good." "Why are you telling me this?" Margot asked, scrubbing a cast iron skillet harder than necessary. Because you are lonely too, and maybe lonely people should not be so alone all the time. I am fine alone. Tamaz made a skeptical noise but did not push. Margot was grateful for that. She had no interest in men, in companionship, in anything that might require her to trust or hope or believe in goodness again. Those parts of her had died in Sacramento, and she was content to let them stay buried. But Xavier kept coming back. Not every day, not even every week, but regularly enough that she began to recognize the sound of his boots on the wooden floor, the particular way he ordered his whiskey neat, no ice. He never bothered her, never spoke to her beyond a polite nod if their eyes happened to meet. He seemed as content with silence as she was, and somehow that made him less threatening. One evening in late August, a drunk Cowan got too rough with one of the saloon girls. He grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks, yanked her toward the stairs even as she protested. Clara was across the room, and the bartender was dealing with another customer. Margot saw it happening, felt her own wrist ache in sympathy, and before she could think better of it, she grabbed a whiskey bottle from the nearest table and brought it down on the back of the cowhand's head. He dropped like a stone. The saloon went quiet. The girl stumbled back, rubbing her wrist, eyes wide. Margot stood there with the bottle still in her hand, breathing hard, waiting for the consequences. Xavier was beside her before she even saw him move. He took the bottle gently from her hand, set it on a table, then hoisted the unconscious cowhand up and started dragging him toward the door. "I will make sure he sleeps it off at the jail," he said to Clara. "No harm done. No harm." The girl whose wrist had been grabbed stepped forward. "She saved me from him. That is not no harm. That is the best kind of harm there is." Clara looked at Margot with new respect. "Get back to work," she said, but her voice was warm. "And thank you." Margot's hands were shaking so badly she had to retreat to the kitchen. Tamaz took one look at her face and pushed her into a chair, pressing a cup of strong coffee into her hands. "Breathe, Mija, you did good. I could have killed him. But you did not. You helped someone who needed help. That is allowed even for people like us. People like us. People who think we are too broken to deserve good things." Margot's eyes burned, but she did not cry. She sipped the coffee and let her hands stop shaking, and tried not to think about how good it had felt to hit someone, to fight back, even if it was on someone else's behalf. Xavier came back an hour later. He found her in the kitchen, which was odd because men did not usually come back here unless invited. Tamaz gave him a look, got a nod in return, and suddenly found an excuse to step outside for a smoke. "You did not have to do that," Margot said, not looking at him. "Drag him to jail, I mean. He was just drunk." "He was hurting someone," Xavier said simply, "and you stopped him. That took courage. It took anger. Sometimes those are the same thing." He leaned against the doorframe, comfortable in a way that suggested he did not need anything from her, was not looking for anything, was just there. "I am Xavier Emerson. I break horses, mostly. Sometimes I scout for the army, but not lately. Work has been scarce." "Margot Neville," she said quietly. "I clean tables and try not to cause trouble. Seems like you are better at the first than the second." She almost smiled. "Almost. Seems like." They stood in silence for a moment. It was not uncomfortable. Finally, Xavier pushed off the doorframe. "Clara says you never take a day off, never go anywhere except here in your room. That is no way to live. It is the way I live. There is a valley about 5 miles north of here. Prettiest place you ever saw, especially in the early morning when the fog is still in the trees. Good place to think or to not think, whichever you need more." He tipped his hat. "If you ever want to see it, I ride out there most Sunday mornings. You would be welcome to come along." He left before she could refuse. Margot stood in the kitchen, coffee cup cooling in her hands, and wondered what it would be like to want to see a pretty valley, to want anything at all beyond making it through another day. Sunday came and went. Then another. On the third Sunday, she found herself awake before dawn, unable to sleep, restless in a way she had not been since arriving in Ukiah. The room felt too small, the air too close. She dressed in her simplest dress, pulled her dark hair into a braid and slipped out of the saloon before she could change her mind. Xavier was saddling his gray gelding outside the livery stable. He looked up when she approached, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Pleasure. He did not say anything about her taking so long to accept his offer, just nodded and gestured to a smaller bay mare already saddled and waiting. "Borrowed her from the livery," he said. "Figured you might come along eventually. You are very sure of yourself." "Not of myself, of you. You have the look of someone who needs to see something beautiful." They rode out of town in the gray pre-dawn, their horses' hooves muffled on the dirt road. The air was cool and clean, smelling of sage and chaparral. Margot had not been on a horse since the day she arrived, and her body remembered the rhythm of it, the gentle sway, the creak of leather. She felt something unknot in her chest, just slightly. True to his word, the valley was beautiful. It opened up before them as the sun rose, all golden grass and dark oaks, a silver thread of creek running through the middle. Fog clung to the hollows, turning everything soft and dreamlike. Xavier dismounted and helped her down, his hands careful and brief on her waist, then walked to the edge of the creek and sat on a flat rock. Margot followed, keeping a respectful distance. They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, burning away the fog, illuminating the world in shades of amber and green. Birds called to each other in the trees. The creek murmured over smooth stones. It was, Margot realized with a sharp pang, the first peace she had felt in months. "My wife died 3 years ago," Xavier said suddenly. "Fever, nothing anyone could do. She was fine one day, gone the next." Margot looked at him, startled. He was staring at the water, his profile hard and weathered. "Her name was Sarah. She was the best person I ever knew. Patient, kind, always seeing the good in people even when they did not deserve it. When she died, I thought I had died too. Spent a year drinking myself stupid, picking fights, trying to get myself killed without having to actually pull the trigger myself." "What stopped you?" Margot asked quietly. "A horse. Meanest stallion you ever saw, more wild than tame. I tried to ride him drunk, figured he would throw me and crack my head open, and that would be that. Instead, he just stood there and let me cry into his mane like a fool. Next morning I woke up sober and realized Sarah would have been ashamed of me. So I stopped trying to die and started trying to figure out how to live." "Did you figure it out? Still working on it?" He finally looked at her. "But I know some things now. I know that being broken is not the same as being worthless. I know that the things we survive change us, but they do not have to destroy us. And I know that sometimes broken things fit together better than whole ones ever could, because they understand each other." Margot's throat was tight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you look like someone who thinks she is too broken to be worth anything, and I am here to tell you that is a lie." She wanted to argue, to push back, to defend her right to her own self-hatred. But sitting there in that beautiful valley with the sun on her face and this lonely, honest man beside her, she could not find the words. Instead she said, "My husband beat me. For 2 years. I thought it was my fault, thought I deserved it, thought if I just tried harder or was quieter or more obedient, he would stop. Then one night he came at me with a knife, drunk and furious about something I never understood, and I shot him. The sheriff said it was self-defense. Half the town said I murdered him. The other half said I probably drove him to it, so I left." "They were wrong," Xavier said, "all of them. You do not know that." "Yes, I do, because no one deserves to be beaten. No one deserves to live in fear. And defending yourself is not murder, it is survival." His voice was fierce, certain. "You did what you had to do, Margot. That is not a sin. That is strength." She turned away, blinking hard. "I do not feel strong." "Strength is not about feeling, it is about doing. You are here, are you not? Still breathing, still working, still getting up every morning. That is strength." They sat together until the sun was fully up, then rode back to town in companionable silence. When they reached the livery stable, Xavier helped her dismount again, and this time his hands lingered just a moment longer. "Same time next Sunday?" he asked. Margot nodded before she could stop herself. "Same time." It became a ritual. Every Sunday morning they rode out to the valley. Sometimes they talked. Xavier told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to break horses from his father, about the years he spent drifting after Sarah died. Margot told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her parents who died of cholera when she was 16, about marrying a man she barely knew because she had nowhere else to go and no way to support herself. Sometimes they did not talk at all, just sat by the creek and let the silence heal them in ways words could not. In town, their relationship remained carefully distant. Margot still worked at the Painted Lady, still kept to herself, still flinched when men raised their voices. But she began to notice small changes. She slept better. Her hands shook less. When she caught her reflection in a window, she sometimes saw a woman instead of a ghost. Clara noticed too. "That cowboy is good for you," she said one evening as they closed up the saloon. "We are just friends." "Friends is a good place to start." "I am not starting anything. I cannot." Clara gave her a knowing look. "Cannot or will not. Does it matter?" "Yes. Cannot means you are not able. Will not means you are afraid. One is a fact, the other is a choice." Margot had no answer for that. September turned to October. The leaves on the oaks in the valley turned gold and red. Xavier started coming to the saloon more often, not just for whiskey but for dinner, which Tamaz made sure Margot delivered to his table. They talked about small things, the weather, the horses he was working with, the new family that had opened a dry goods store down the street. It was easy, comfortable, and it terrified her. She had not been comfortable with a man since before her marriage, had not felt safe. But Xavier never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like she owed him anything. He was just there, steady as the mountains, patient as the seasons. One night in late October, a man came to the saloon asking questions about her. He was well-dressed, clean-shaven, with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. He said he was a lawyer from Sacramento, looking for a Mrs. Margaret Elizabeth Neville regarding her late husband's estate. Margot froze when Clara came to the kitchen to tell her. "I told him I did not know anyone by that name," Clara said. "But he is not leaving. Says he will be at the hotel for a few days." "He is not here about an estate," Margot said, her voice hollow. "My husband did not have anything worth inheriting. He is here because someone wants to cause trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that says a woman who kills her husband should hang, even if he was trying to kill her first." Tamaz swore in Spanish. Clara's face hardened. "You are under my protection now, so is everyone in this saloon. He wants to cause trouble, he will find more than he bargained for." But Margot knew better. She had seen this before, the way powerful men could twist the law to suit their purposes. Her husband's brother had money, connections. He had sworn at the funeral that she would pay for what she had done. She had hoped the distance would be enough, but apparently it was not. She did not go to the valley that Sunday. She stayed in her room, door locked, curtains drawn. Xavier came looking for her, found Clara instead. "What happened?" he asked. Clara told him. His expression went dark and dangerous, the kind of look that reminded Margot he had survived years in rough country, that gentleness was a choice he made, not a weakness he suffered from. "Where is she?" "In her room. She will not come out." Xavier took the stairs 2 at a time. He knocked on her door, firm but not aggressive. "Margot, it is Xavier. Let me in. Go away. Not going to happen." "I do not need your help." "Maybe not, but I am offering it anyway." A pause. "Please." Something in that last word broke through her defenses. She opened the door a crack. Xavier stood in the hallway, hat in his hands, worry etched in the lines around his eyes. "He is going to take me back to Sacramento," she said. "Or worse. My husband's brother wants revenge and he has the money to get it. Then we will not let him take you. We. There is no we, Xavier. You do not owe me anything." He stepped closer and she let him, which was its own kind of miracle. "Maybe I do not owe you, but I want to help you. There is a difference." "Why?" "Because broken things fit together better than whole ones," he said simply. "And because I am tired of being alone. And because you make me want to believe that there is still good in the world. Is that enough of a reason?" Margot's eyes filled with tears. "I cannot drag you into my mess." "You are not dragging. I am choosing." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back, and when she did not, he took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused, and it felt like safety. "Let me help, please." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Xavier went to see the lawyer that evening. Margot waited in her room, pacing, convinced he would come back with bad news or not come back at all. Instead, he returned 2 hours later with a grim satisfaction on his face. "His name is Richard Neville," Xavier said. "He is your late husband's brother. You were right about that. He claims there are questions about the circumstances of your husband's death, wants you to return to Sacramento to testify in front of a grand jury. There was already an inquest. They ruled it self-defense. He knows that. This is not about justice. This is about revenge." Xavier leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "But here is the thing. California is a big place, and Ukiah is a long way from Sacramento. He has no authority here, no warrant, nothing legal to compel you to go with him. He is counting on you being scared enough to comply." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that Mrs. Neville was under my protection, and if he had legal business with her, he could present it through proper channels. Until then, he could get the hell out of my town." "Your town?" Xavier shrugged. "I have lived here longer than he has. That makes it more mine than his." He paused. "He did not take it well. Said some ugly things about you, about women in general. I told him if I saw him near you or the saloon, we would have a problem. You are going to get hurt because of me. I have been hurt before. I survived." He pushed off the wall, came to stand in front of her. "You do not have to face this alone, Margot. You do not have to face anything alone anymore, not if you do not want to." She looked up at him, this lonely cowboy who had somehow become her safe harbor. "I am terrified," she whispered. "I know." "That is okay. Being terrified does not mean you are weak. It means you are human." He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was so tender it made her ache. "I am terrified too, if it helps. Terrified I will say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, push too hard or not hard enough. But I am more terrified of letting you go through this alone." "Why do you care so much?" "Because you matter. Because you deserve to be protected. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for." His voice dropped lower. "And because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you and I cannot seem to do anything about it." Margot's breath caught. "Xavier, you do not have to say anything. You do not have to feel the same way. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, however you feel, I am here." She could not speak, so she did something she had not done in years. She reached up and touched his face, her fingertips tracing the strong line of his jaw, the scar above his left eyebrow, the weathered skin that spoke of years under the sun. He held perfectly still, barely breathing, letting her explore. "I do not know if I can love anyone," she said finally. "I do not know if that part of me still works. That is okay. But I want to try with you, if you will be patient with me." "I have been breaking wild horses for 20 years, Xavier said, and now there was a warmth in his voice that wrapped around her like a blanket. "Patience is the one thing I am good at." She stood on her toes and kissed him, brief and chaste, a promise more than a passion. He cupped her face gently and kissed her back, and it was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses she had known before. It was soft and careful and full of a tenderness that made her want to cry. When they pulled apart, she was shaking, but not from fear. "I am terrified," she said again. "Me too," he admitted, "but we can be terrified together." The lawyer stayed in town for 3 more days, lurking around the hotel, asking questions about Margot to anyone who would listen. The town, to its credit, closed ranks around her. The shopkeepers claimed not to know her. The other saloon refused to serve Richard Neville. Even the sheriff, a gruff man named Tom Porter who rarely involved himself in personal matters, made it clear that he had reviewed the Sacramento inquest records and found them in order, and unless Mr. Neville had new evidence, he should move along. Richard left on the 4th day, but not before stopping by the Painted Lady one last time. Margot was in the kitchen when he came in. Xavier was at the bar, and when Richard asked to speak with Mrs. Neville, Xavier stood up. "I already told you, she does not want to speak with you." "I am her legal family, I have a right." "You have no rights here, get out." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You do not know what she did. She murdered my brother in cold blood. Your brother tried to kill her and she defended herself. That is not murder, that is survival. You were not there. You do not know." "Neither were you," Xavier said coldly. "But I know her. And I know men like your brother, men who think a wedding ring gives them ownership, men who think fear is the same as respect. Your brother got what he deserved, and if you do not leave right now, you might get the same." It was a naked threat, delivered in a tone that left no room for doubt. Richard looked around the saloon, saw Clara and Tomas and several regular customers all watching with unfriendly eyes, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. He left without another word. Margot came out of the kitchen after he was gone. Xavier turned to her, the anger draining from his face, replaced by concern. "Are you all right? You defended me," she said, wonder in her voice. "You actually defended me." "Of course I did. No one has ever done that before." He crossed the room, took her hands in his. "Then everyone before me was a fool. You deserve to be defended. You deserve to be protected. You deserve every good thing, Margot, whether you believe it or not." She pulled him down and kissed him right there in the middle of the saloon in front of Clara and Tomas and everyone else. Let them see. Let them know. This man was hers and she was his, and maybe that was not such a terrifying thing after all. Winter came to Ukiah. Xavier moved from the boarding house where he had been staying into a small cabin just outside town, a place with 2 rooms, a good stove, and a corral for his horses. He asked Margot to visit, and she did, nervously at first, then with growing comfort. The cabin was sparse but clean, and Xavier cooked simple meals that they ate while talking about everything and nothing. He never pushed her for more than she was ready to give. When she grew quiet or distant, he gave her space. When she reached for him, he was there. Slowly, carefully, she learned to trust him, learned that not all men were like her husband, learned that gentleness was not a trick or a trap but a gift freely given. Clara noticed the change in her. "You are smiling more," she said one evening. "I am, you are, it is good to see. He is good for you, that cowboy." "He is," Margot admitted. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to turn mean or demanding, but he never does. Maybe because he is not that kind of man. Maybe. Or maybe you just deserve happiness, and you are finally letting yourself have it. Margot considered that. Happiness had seemed like such an impossible thing for so long, a luxury meant for other people. But lately, when she woke in the morning, the first thing she felt was not dread but something that might be hope. When Xavier smiled at her, her heart did not race with fear but with something warmer, something that felt dangerously like joy. Christmas came, and with it a fierce winter storm that trapped most of the town indoors for 3 days. Xavier rode into town before the worst of it hit, leading his gray gelding through knee-deep snow to the Painted Lady. Clara took one look at him and laughed. "You rode through a blizzard to see her, wanted to make sure she was safe." "She is safe. You are an idiot. Both things can be true." Margot came downstairs wrapped in a shawl drawn by the sound of voices. When she saw Xavier, snow-covered and half-frozen, she felt something in her chest crack open. "You could have died out there." "I am hard to kill," he said with a crooked smile. "Believe me, I have tried." She pulled him into the kitchen, made him sit by the stove, brought him hot coffee and blankets. Tamaz took one look at them and announced he was taking the evening off. Clara did the same, leaving them alone in the warm kitchen with the storm howling outside. "You are completely mad," Margot said, rubbing his cold hands between hers. "Probably," Xavier agreed, "but I could not stand the thought of being apart from you for days, especially not for Christmas. I did not even know you celebrated Christmas. I do not, usually, but this year I wanted to." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I made you something." She opened it carefully. Inside was a leather bracelet, beautifully tooled with a pattern of oak leaves and wildflowers. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever given her. "Xavier, I do not have anything for you." "Yes, you do." He took the bracelet and fastened it around her wrist. "You have yourself. That is all I want, all I have ever wanted." She kissed him then, deep and desperate and full of all the words she did not know how to say. He kissed her back with equal fervor, and for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be desired without being owned, to be wanted without being possessed. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "I did not think I could, but I do. I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I promise you, Margot, I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it." They spent that Christmas Eve in the kitchen, wrapped in blankets, talking and kissing and planning a future that had seemed impossible just months before. When the storm finally broke 3 days later, Xavier asked her to marry him, and she said yes without hesitation. They married in February in a small ceremony at the church on the edge of town. Clara stood as her witness, and Tamaz stood for Xavier. The preacher was an old man who asked no questions about her past, just smiled benevolently and pronounced them man and wife. When Xavier kissed her, she felt the last of her broken pieces start to knit back together. They moved into the cabin together. It was small and drafty, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Xavier taught her how to help with the horses, how to approach them gently and earn their trust. She taught him how to cook something more complicated than beans and bacon. They learned each other's rhythms, their habits, their fears and hopes. It was not always easy. Margot still had nightmares sometimes, waking in a cold sweat, convinced she was back in Sacramento, back in that house with her husband's footsteps heavy on the stairs. But Xavier was always there to hold her, to remind her where she was, who she was, that she was safe. Spring came, and with it new life. The wildflowers bloomed in the valley where they had first begun to heal. The horses Xavier had been working with throughout the winter were finally ready to sell, and the money they brought was enough to buy lumber and supplies to expand the cabin, add another room. They were building that addition in late April when Margot realized she was pregnant. She had missed 2 cycles, and the nausea that hit her every morning was impossible to ignore. The realization filled her with a complicated tangle of emotions. Joy, yes, but also fear. She had never wanted children with her first husband, had been grateful that none came. But this was different. This was Xavier's child, and the thought of bringing a new life into the world with him felt like the ultimate act of faith. She told him that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. He went very still, his hand tightening on hers. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes." "I am sorry we did not plan for this." "Sorry," he turned to her and there were tears in his eyes. "Margot, I am not sorry. I am terrified and amazed and so damn happy I can barely breathe. A baby. Our baby." She started crying then, relief and joy flooding through her. "I was afraid you would be angry. Never. Not about this. Not about anything." He pulled her into his arms, held her close. "We are going to have a family, Margot. A real family. The kind we both deserved all along. The pregnancy was not easy." Margot was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Xavier fussed over her like a mother hen, making sure she rested, bringing her whatever she could stomach, reading to her from the newspaper in the evenings. Clara came by regularly with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Tamaz brought soups and stews designed to tempt her appetite. By summer, the sickness passed and she blossomed. Xavier could not keep his hands off her belly, constantly feeling for the baby's kicks, talking to their child through her skin. He finished the addition to the cabin, turning it into a nursery with a cradle he built himself from oak wood. It was beautiful, sturdy and smooth, carved with the same oak leaf pattern as her bracelet. "If it is a boy, I want to name him James," Margot said one evening as they lay in bed, her belly round and heavy between them. "After my father, James Emerson," Xavier tried out. "I like it." "And if it is a girl, Sarah," he said quietly, "if you do not mind. I would like to name her after my first wife." Margot took his hand, placed it on her belly where their daughter or son was somersaulting. "Sarah is a beautiful name." The baby came in early December, a long and difficult labor that left Margot exhausted and Xavier nearly mad with worry. But when the midwife finally placed their son in Margot's arms, perfect and red-faced and howling, all the pain was forgotten. James Xavier Emerson had his father's brown hair and his mother's dark eyes, and he was the most beautiful thing either of them had ever seen. "We made him," Margot said in wonder, tracing his tiny features. "We actually made a person." "We did," Xavier agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You did. You are amazing." "We both did," she corrected. "And we are going to raise him right. With love and patience and all the things we did not get." "Damn right we are." James was a fussy baby, colicky and prone to tears, but they learned his rhythms, figured out what soothed him. Xavier would walk the floor with him at night, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice. Margot would nurse him by the fire, marveling at the trust in his small face, the way he looked at her like she hung the moon. Life settled into a new pattern. Xavier still broke horses, but he did it closer to home now, rarely gone for more than a day at a time. Margot took in sewing to help with expenses, her skilled fingers quick with needle and thread. They were not rich, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. The town accepted them fully now. The whispers about Margot's past had faded, replaced by respect for the woman who had built a new life from the ashes of the old. When James was 6 months old, Clara asked Margot to be godmother to her own daughter, born just weeks after James. It was a mark of acceptance, of belonging, and Margot cried when she accepted. Winter turned to spring, spring to summer. James learned to crawl, then to walk, then to run on sturdy toddler legs. Xavier taught him about horses, letting him pet the gentle mares, showing him how to offer an apple on a flat palm. Margot taught him his letters, read him stories, sang him the lullabies her mother had sung to her. On a warm evening in June, when James was 2 years old, Margot told Xavier she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only joy. They had done this before. They could do it again. Their daughter was born the following February, on a snowy morning that reminded Margot of the Christmas Eve when Xavier had ridden through a blizzard to be with her. She was smaller than James had been, quieter, with Xavier's whiskey-colored eyes and a cap of dark hair. They named her Sarah Clara Emerson, honoring both the woman Xavier had loved and lost, and the woman who had given Margot a chance when she needed it most. "Our family is complete," Xavier said, holding Sarah while James peered at his new sister with suspicious fascination. "Is it?" Margot asked, smiling. "Well, maybe not complete, but it is ours, and that is what matters." The years passed with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. James grew tall and serious, with his father's way with horses and his mother's quiet strength. Sarah was all fire and laughter, fearless and bold, charging into life with the confidence of a child who had never known fear. Xavier's hair started to gray at the temples. Margot found lines around her eyes that had not been there before, laugh lines, proof of joy. They added onto the cabin again, building a proper dining room, a larger bedroom for the children. The corral expanded as Xavier's reputation grew, and people came from all over the county to have him break their horses. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Margot back to the valley where they had first begun to heal. James and Sarah stayed with Clara and Tomas for the day. It was just the two of them, older now, wiser, but still holding the same deep love that had brought them together. They sat by the creek where they had sat that first morning. The oaks were full and green, the grass golden in the afternoon sun. "You ever think about Sacramento?" Xavier asked. "Sometimes," Margot admitted, "but not the way I used to. It used to be all I could think about, all the pain and shame and fear. Now when I think about it, I think about how it brought me here, to you, to our children, to this life. Do you regret any of it?" "I regret that I suffered. I regret that I did not leave sooner. But I do not regret where I ended up." She took his hand, laced their fingers together. "The town called me too broken, you know. That is what they said in Sacramento, that I was too broken, too ruined to ever be worth anything. And what do you say now?" She smiled, that full, genuine smile that had taken years to come back to her. "I say that broken things fit together best. You taught me that. You took someone who thought she was beyond repair and showed her that broken just means you have survived something. And surviving is its own kind of strength." Xavier pulled her close, kissed her temple. "You are the strongest person I know, Margot Emerson, and I am so damn grateful that you walked into Ukiah all those years ago. So am I." They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in town, their children were laughing, playing, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and wanted. The cabin they had built together waited for them, full of memories and warmth. Life stretched ahead of them, not perfect, never perfect, but good. So very good. The lonely cowboy had found his home. The broken woman had found her healing. Together, they had built something neither could have managed alone, something beautiful and lasting and true. And when they finally rode back to town as the stars began to appear, Margot knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she belonged with, Living the life she had never dared to dream was possible. The cabin welcomed them home with lamplight glowing in the windows. James ran out to greet them, Sarah on his heels, both of them talking excitedly about their day. Xavier helped Margot down from her horse, his hands lingering on her waist, and she kissed him quick and sweet before the children reached them. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, they sat together on the porch in the rocking chairs Xavier had made, watching the stars wheel overhead. Margot wore the leather bracelet he had given her that long ago Christmas, the tooling worn smooth with years of wear but still beautiful. Xavier's hand found hers and they rocked in comfortable silence. "I love you," she said, not for the first time, not for the last. "I love you too," he replied, the words as true as the first time he had spoken them. And in that moment, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had created, the love they had fought for and earned and nurtured, Margot knew that she was no longer broken. She was healed. She was whole. She was home. The years continued their steady march. James turned 15, then 16, tall and capable, already showing the same patience with horses that his father possessed. Sarah grew into a spirited 12-year-old who could outride most of the boys in town and was not afraid to prove it. The cabin had been expanded again, now a proper house with glass windows and a real wood floor, testament to the hard work and success of Xavier's reputation as the best horse trainer in 3 counties. Margot's sewing had grown into a small business. Women came to her for their wedding dresses, their Sunday best, their children's clothes. She worked from a sunny room Xavier had built especially for her, with a large table for cutting fabric and shelves for her supplies. Sometimes Clara would come by and they would sew together, talking about their children, their husbands, their lives. "Do you ever think about how far we have come?" Clara asked one afternoon, pinning a hem while Margot worked on embroidery. "All the time," Margot admitted. "I think about the woman I was when I arrived here, how scared and broken I felt. I barely recognize her now." "That is because she does not exist anymore. She became someone new, someone stronger. Someone loved," Margot added softly. "That made all the difference." On a golden afternoon in September, when the air was just starting to crisp with autumn, Xavier came home with news. A man from San Francisco had heard about his work and wanted to hire him to break a string of 20 horses, more money than Xavier had ever been offered for a single job. But it would mean traveling to the coast for at least a month, maybe longer. "I told him no," Xavier said. "I will not be away from you and the children that long." But Margot saw the longing in his eyes, the professional pride. "You should go," she said. "We will be fine. James is old enough to handle the work here and I have my sewing. This is a wonderful opportunity. I do not want to leave you. You are not leaving me. You are taking a job. There is a difference." She cupped his face in her hands. "I am not that frightened woman anymore, Xavier. You do not have to protect me from the world. I can stand on my own 2 feet now. I know you can. That does not mean I want to be apart from you." "1 month," she said. "We have a lifetime together. We can spare 1 month." So Xavier went to San Francisco, and Margot discovered just how strong she had become. She ran the household, managed the horses with James's help, kept up with her sewing orders, and took care of Sarah, all while missing Xavier with an ache that settled deep in her bones. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from loving someone deeply and knowing they would return. He wrote letters, long, rambling things about the horses he was working with, the city with its crowds and noise, how much he missed the smell of her hair and Sarah's laugh and James's quiet competence. She wrote back about the everyday details of their life, the small triumphs and challenges, how their bed felt too big without him. When he returned 5 weeks later, tan and tired and smiling, she ran to him like a girl, and he caught her up in his arms and spun her around while the children laughed. "Never again," he said into her hair. "I do not care how much money they offer. I am never leaving you for that long again." "Deal," she agreed, and kissed him in front of God and everyone. The money from the San Francisco job allowed them to buy more land, to expand the corrals, to hire a young man from town to help with the daily work. Xavier could be more selective about the horses he took on, focusing on the challenging ones that needed his particular touch. James turned 18, a young man now, with his father's height and his mother's dark eyes. He had his eye on a girl in town, the daughter of the feed store owner, a sweet, quiet girl named Emma who blushed whenever James looked at her. "You should ask her to the church social," Margot told him one evening. "What if she says no?" "What if she says yes?" Margot countered. "You cannot spend your whole life afraid of what might go wrong, James. Sometimes you have to take a chance." He did ask, and Emma said yes, and within a year they were engaged. The wedding was planned for the following June, a big affair that had the whole town excited. Margot made Emma's dress, pouring all her skill and love into the white silk and lace, remembering her own wedding, so different, so small, but no less meaningful. On the night before the wedding, James came to find his mother. She was sitting on the porch, watching the sun set, and he sat beside her in Xavier's chair. "I am scared," he admitted. "That is normal. Marriage is a big step. How did you know that father was the right one? After everything you went through before?" Margot was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I knew because he never tried to change me or fix me. He just loved me exactly as I was, broken pieces and all. He gave me space to heal at my own pace, never pushed, never demanded. And when I was ready to love him back, he was there waiting. That is what I want to be for Emma. Someone she can trust completely. Then that is what you will be." She took his hand. "You are your father's son, James. You have his patience, his kindness, his strength. Emma is lucky to have you. I hope so. I know so." The wedding was beautiful. Emma looked radiant in her white dress. James looked terrified and proud in equal measure. Xavier cried during the vows, not ashamed to show his emotion. Margot held his hand and cried too, remembering their own vows, the promises they had kept through the years. After the ceremony, as the town gathered for the reception, Xavier pulled Margot aside. "That is going to be Sarah someday," he said, watching their daughter dance with wild abandon. "Not for many years yet, I hope." "Agreed. I am not ready to lose her." "You are not losing anyone. You are gaining a daughter-in-law, I know. But it reminds me how fast time goes. Seems like yesterday you walked into town with blood on your dress and fear in your eyes." "That was a different life," Margot said. "A different person. Same person, just healed." He turned to her, took both her hands. "I am so proud of you, Margot, of the woman you have become, the mother you are, the life you have built. You inspire me every single day." "We built it together," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." "We saved each other," Xavier said. "I think that is the best kind of love story." As the sun set and the dancing continued, Margot looked around at the life she had made. Her son, married now, starting his own journey. Her daughter, wild and free and utterly fearless. Her husband, the man who had taught her that love did not have to hurt, that gentleness was not weakness, that broken things could be made whole again. The town that had accepted her, given her a home, let her become someone new. She thought about the woman she had been, walking into Ukiah with nothing but fear and shame and a desperate hope for something better. She thought about how far she had come, how much she had survived, how thoroughly she had been transformed by love and time and her own stubborn refusal to stay broken. The town had called her too broken. The lonely cowboy had said broken things fit together best, and he had been right. Their jagged edges had aligned perfectly. Their scars had matched. Their damaged hearts had healed stronger together than they ever could have alone. That night, after the wedding celebration had ended and they returned home to their quiet house, Xavier and Margot lay in bed talking about the future. James and Emma would stay in town for now, but eventually they wanted their own place. Sarah was already making noises about wanting to learn to train horses like her father, despite Xavier's protests that it was too dangerous for a young girl. "She is your daughter," Margot said, laughing. "Did you really think she would be content to just sew and cook?" "I had hoped," Xavier admitted. "For my own peace of mind, she will be fine. We raised her to be strong and smart. We have to trust that." "I do trust her. It is the rest of the world I do not trust." "Then we teach her to protect herself, the same way you taught me." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "You never needed teaching. You already knew how to survive. I just gave you a safe place to do it." "You gave me everything," Margot said, rolling over to face him in the darkness. "A home, a family, a reason to believe in goodness again." "You saved my life, Xavier Emerson." "You saved mine too," he replied, pulling her close. "We saved each other. That is how it works." They fell asleep tangled together, the way they had every night for 15 years, and Margot dreamed of the future, bright and full of possibility. The years rolled on. James and Emma had their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after Margot. The honor brought tears to her eyes, the knowledge that her son wanted to remember her this way, wanted to pass her name to a new generation. Little Margaret was a sweet-tempered baby who looked like Emma but had James's serious eyes. Sarah, true to her word, began training with Xavier. At 16, she had a gift for horses that even surprised her father. She could gentle the wildest mare, could read their moods and needs with uncanny accuracy. Xavier stopped protesting and started teaching her everything he knew, pride overcoming protectiveness. Margot turned 40, then 45. Xavier's hair went fully gray, but he was still strong and capable, still working with horses, still holding her close every night. They talked sometimes about slowing down, about letting James take over more of the work, but neither was quite ready to stop. There was too much life left to live. On their 20th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the house. James and Emma with little Margaret, now 3 years old and chattering constantly. Sarah, 18 and beautiful and fierce. Clara and Tamaz, older now but still vital, still the family they had chosen all those years ago. Other friends from town, people who had watched Margot and Xavier build their life together, who had celebrated their triumphs and supported them through challenges. As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Xavier took Margot's hand and led her outside. The stars were brilliant overhead, a million points of light in the velvet darkness. 20 years, he said. Best 20 years of my life. Mine too, Margot agreed. She leaned against him, comfortable and content. Do you remember what you said that first day in the valley, about broken things fitting together best? I remember. I did not believe you then. I thought you were just being kind, trying to make me feel better about being damaged. And now? Now I know you were right. We were both broken, both carrying wounds that would not heal. But together we made something whole, something beautiful, something that will last long after we are gone. Xavier kissed her, slow and sweet. I love you, Margot Emerson, every day more than the last. I love you too, forever. They stood under the stars, holding each other, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, not perfection but understanding, not wholeness but acceptance. Not someone to complete them, but someone to stand beside them, sharing the weight of the world, sharing the joy. The lonely cowboy was lonely no more. The broken woman had been remade, and the town that once called her too damaged to save now knew her as a beloved neighbor, a devoted mother, a skilled seamstress, a woman who had survived and thrived and built something beautiful from the ashes of her former life. Years later, when Xavier and Margot were old and gray, when James had taken over the horse training, and Sarah had married a good man who loved her fire, when there were grandchildren and even great-grandchildren running through the house they had built together, people would still talk about them. About the cowboy who saw beauty in brokenness, about the woman who learned to trust again, about the love that had healed them both. And on warm summer evenings, you could still find them on their porch, rocking in chairs worn smooth by decades of use, holding hands and watching the sun set over the valley where it had all begun. They would talk about the past sometimes, remembering, but mostly they lived in the present, grateful for every day they had together. When Xavier was 70, he finally admitted that perhaps it was time to retire from training horses. His bones ached in the morning and his hands were not as steady as they once were. He passed the business to James completely, content to spend his days with Margot, tending the garden, playing with his great-grandchildren, living the peaceful life he had earned. Margot's eyes were not as sharp as they had been, so she gave up fine embroidery, but she still sewed simple things, quilts and curtains and baby clothes. She spent her mornings in her sunny sewing room, her afternoons with Xavier, their evenings surrounded by family. On a warm night in June, when the air smelled of jasmine and the stars were particularly bright, Margot and Xavier sat on their porch for the last time together. Xavier had been feeling poorly for weeks, his breath short, his energy limited. They both knew his time was coming, and there was a strange peace in that knowledge. "Are you afraid?" Margot asked, holding his hand. "No," Xavier said honestly. "I have lived a good life, Margot, better than I ever deserved. I got to love you, raise children with you, watch them grow and have families of their own. I got to wake up every morning for 47 years and see your face first thing. How could I be afraid?" "I will miss you," she said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "I will miss you too. But you are not getting rid of me that easily. I will be waiting for you wherever we go next, and we will have forever to sit on porches and watch sunsets and love each other. You promise?" "I promise. Broken things fit together best, remember. Even in death, we will find each other again." He died peacefully 3 days later in his sleep, with Margot holding his hand. The town turned out for his funeral, remembering the quiet man who had trained their horses, raised a good family, and loved his wife with a devotion that had become legendary. Margot lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, honored and loved. She spoke often of Xavier, keeping his memory alive, telling the younger generations about the lonely cowboy who had seen her brokenness and called it beautiful. When she finally followed him, on a golden autumn morning when the leaves were turning and the air was crisp, she went with a smile on her face and peace in her heart. Her last words were, "I am coming, Xavier. Wait for me." They buried her beside him, under an oak tree in the town cemetery. The headstone read, "Margot Neville Emerson, beloved wife, mother, and friend. Broken things fit together best." And every year on their anniversary, their descendants would gather at that grave, laying wildflowers from the valley where their love story had truly begun, remembering the woman who had arrived in Ukiah broken and alone, and the man who had showed her that broken was not the same as worthless, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the pieces we think are beyond repair. Their story became town legend, passed down through generations. The lonely cowboy and the broken woman who had found in each other exactly what they needed, building a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, proving that sometimes the best love stories are not about two perfect people finding each other, but about two damaged souls deciding that together they could be whole. And in that truth, in that simple, profound truth, lay the real magic of their story. Not that they had saved each other, though they had. Not that they had built a beautiful life together, though they did. But that they had looked at each other's broken pieces and seen not something to fix or hide, but something to honor, to cherish, to hold gently while time and love did their healing work. The town had called her too broken. The lonely cowboy had said broken things fit together best. And in the end, love had proven him right.